Well, I don't know how it was at your house on Thanksgiving Day growing up, but at my house, Thanksgiving was one of those Norman Rockwell kinds of holidays, or at least my mother did her very best to make it seem so. I remember her getting up very early in the morning to put the turkey in because it was likely we would have a huge group around our table, and she was usually cooking the largest bird she could find. And all of us kids, we'd be pressed into service, ironing the tablecloth, setting the table, bringing in flower arrangements, polishing the silver, answering the door. Finally, when everything was ready and we were all assembled together, someone, typically my mother, would make some sort of Thanksgiving speech. It usually went like this. Today is Thanksgiving Day. This is the day that we remember all the good things that God has given us and the fact that our lives are filled with abundance. Before your Father blesses the food, everyone sitting around the table must share one thing they are thankful for this year. From what I understand, this exercise was not limited to my family, as many of you do the same thing at your house. Anyone? Okay. But it must not be all that much fun, I got to thinking this week, if your life doesn't seem filled with good things, if you're having trouble thinking about what you might be thankful for this year. In fact, come to think of it, all of my years of Thanksgiving celebrations at my parents' house, I never heard anyone say in response to my mother's directive anything like, pass, I have nothing to be thankful for this year, or just can't think of one thing, sorry. The reason for that, of course, is that we would never break decorum and say something like that, but the truth of the matter is that every one of us at some time or another has felt that devastation or heartbreak was the defining characteristic of our lives, not overwhelming thankfulness. You know what I mean? As I anticipate Thanksgiving this year with my family, I have to wonder how it will go down. Normally, we can overlook the sullen teenager, just a phase, or pull it together to make pleasant conversation with the uncle that everyone despises. It's only once a year. But with the political and ideological divisions we're experiencing up close and personal this year, I imagine there might be some among us who are dreading family Thanksgiving this week, and not just because our candidate won or lost. Around my table, anyway, there will be people who are now feeling that their very lives and safety are threatened. How can we sit around a table and share a meal with people who think and vote in polar opposite ways? And worse, what does our own personal pain and internal division say about the dark and divided times in which we live? How will justice and peace come to be in a world where even Thanksgiving dinner is a reminder of all that is broken? What can save us? Well, deep grief and separation from the community around them was the reality for Zechariah and Elizabeth after decades of married life in which they found themselves unable to have a family. And in addition to their personal pain, deep political conflict and division surrounded them in the Roman-occupied region of Galilee, where they lived. All of these things were the backdrop to the beautiful song sung by Zechariah in the first chapter of Luke's gospel. Here's the backstory. Zechariah was a professional religious person, a priest, married to Elizabeth. And as most professional religious people are, he was very righteous. That was a joke. The text says that he followed all the rules, but Elizabeth was barren. She was unable to have children for their whole marriage long, and by now the years had gone by and they knew that their hopes were totally dashed, not a chance for a miracle to happen for them. This was sad, of course, but in those days it was more than sad. It was devastating. Not only did not having children mean there was no one to care for you in your old age, it also sent the message to everyone around you that you are somehow cursed by God. Everybody felt sorry for you. Well, one day, Zechariah showed up at the temple to work his shift. He was going about his business, making sacrifices on behalf of the people he served, and the angel Gabriel appeared to him. Shocked, he listened as the angel told him that his wife Elizabeth would conceive and bear a son who would be named John, a prophet who would turn the people's hearts toward God and toward each other. Well, Zechariah didn't believe it. I mean, this wasn't the first time in the story of the Jewish people that an angel had shown up promising a baby. But you know, it's sort of the thing that you never think is going to happen to you. For years they'd been married and had been unable to have children, so it seemed almost reasonable, only reasonable, for Zechariah to ask the angel, "How is this going to happen? I'm old. Elizabeth is old." Seems like a reasonable question to me. But Gabriel, the angel, he wasn't amused. I think he might have been a little touchy because he was nervous about his next assignment, appearing to an unwed teenager to tell her she'd be delivering the Son of God. But in any case, the angel struck Zechariah dumb. He couldn't talk. And when he came out of the temple unable to speak, the people knew that something big had happened, but they didn't know what. For 9 long months, this would be the case for Zechariah until his wife Elizabeth, who did become pregnant, delivered a baby boy, and they were headed to the temple for the naming ceremony of the baby. Elizabeth was insisting to her friends and family that the baby would be named John. But the people around her said, "No, that's against tradition. He has to be named Zechariah for his father." Still unable to speak, Zechariah took up a tablet and wrote an urgent message. "The baby's name is John." And in that moment, his tongue was loosed, the text says, and Zechariah began to speak. And what he spoke was spoken in the language of blessing, a poem that narrated the eternal human cycle of remembering the promises of God fulfilled, of finding ourselves in deep despair and darkness once again, and of speaking of the hope that would surely save us. Zechariah spoke of history and future, of the times when God saved us from our enemies when we thought it wasn't possible, of the people who surrounded us, giving us the courage to serve God without fear, even though we felt crippled by fear. And he spoke of messengers like his son John, who would help us find our way again, help us remember that God is always waiting to forgive us and welcome us back into the persistent march toward justice and peace, toward the coming reign of God. And then when Zechariah said his final blessing, you have to know that people in the crowd teared up. By the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet in the way of peace. The language of blessing that speaks of history and future is what we are given today on this edge of Thanksgiving week. We'll begin Advent next week, where we enter a whole season of waiting in the darkness, trying to live as if we believe that the light is coming to guide our feet in the way of peace. But today we have the song of Zechariah beckoning us toward gratitude and relationship, because he knew the cyclical nature of human living would lead us again into darkness. And the only thing that would save us is remembering to turn our hearts again toward God and toward each other. If you're like me, you've had a little trouble stomaching the news this week. It's getting a little better, but every time I check my Facebook feed or my New York Times alerts, I've been steeling myself for what I'll read. What a surprise it was then to read the story this week about Phoenix teenager Jamal Hinton, who got a text on his phone one day from a number he didn't recognize. The text said something like, "Thanksgiving at my house? This is Grandma." Well, Jamal was puzzled because he was pretty sure that his grandma did not know how to text. But he texted back anyway, "Sure, and could you send me your picture?" He suspected it might be a wrong number. Wanda, the grandmother, had meant to send the text to her grandson, 24-year-old Brandon Burgoyne, who had recently gotten a new phone and changed his number, and Jamal now had Brandon's number. When Wanda sent her picture a few moments later, that of a middle-aged white woman with long blonde hair, Jamal then sent back a picture of himself, 17-year-old African-American teenage boy. They both laughed, and Jamal texted jokingly, "Can I still get a plate, though?" Wanda replied, "Of course. That's what grandmas do. We feed everyone." A few days ago, Wanda and Jamal met each other in person, and they're now friends in real life. Wanda is cooking Thanksgiving dinner, and Jamal and his whole family are coming over to eat. They're bringing the dessert. Wherever you'll gather for Thanksgiving this year, I'm inviting you to follow the simple and powerful example of Zechariah and view your life not through circumstances that make it seem empty, but rather through the lens of God's salvation, as it has been and as it will be. Even if, when the question is asked around the dinner table, you can't think of one single thing to be thankful for, the weight of your pain is so heavy, then turn your heart toward the one who can balance out the scales of utter inequity and lift your countenance from sadness to hope. Open your eyes and see your life filled to overflowing with the goodness of God. And then open your heart to the richness of justice-making community so that together we may move this world toward what God imagines for us. For me, I know that when trouble and dissension and hopelessness threaten me this week, I will be thinking of you, of this community. I will be thinking of our children and their voices raised in song last week singing, "Don't be afraid," after a week when I was more afraid than I have ever been. I will be thinking of the pile of delicious cookies delivered to the office this week with a note from one of you for the staff that read, "I am thankful for all of you and the work that you do to make Riverside a healthy and vibrant community, unafraid to be a prophetic witness." I will be thinking of the mothers of this church, several of whom noticed that I was sick last week and made sure that I had nourishing food to eat. I will think of a member of this church emailing me to let me know she was safe after being arrested for protesting the Dakota pipeline, living her faith on behalf of us all. And I will think of a new Riversider who sat in my office this week talking about her first time taking communion here at Riverside, sitting in a pew unsure whether she was welcome but being invited up to the front, and recalling that experience with tears in her eyes while she said, "Thank you for making a place for me at the table." I will think of our food pantry volunteers who spent all day yesterday collecting almost $2,000 worth of donations for the food pantry. I will think of all of you, because this grace-filled, justice-making community helps me remember what will save us, turning toward God and turning toward each other again and again and again. Today, Riverside Church, I'm so grateful that you help me remember, by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet in the way of peace. May it ever be so. Amen.